The sun hung like a rusty coin over the town of Deadwood Creek when Jedediah Clay stumbled in his boots, long gone, leaving cracked soles to kiss the dust. The wind carried his shadow stretched thin behind him, a ghost of the man who once broke mustangs for the McCready Ranch. His shirt, missing 2 buttons, flapped like a surrender flag, and the twin bundles under his arms whimpered like hungry coyote pups. Wrapped in his dead wife's quilt, those babies didn't cry so much as tremble, their tiny fists clenched against a world that had already turned its back. Folks on the boardwalk paused. Old Man Henderson spat tobacco into the dirt, and the Dawson sisters clutched their hymn books tighter. Everyone knew Jed, or thought they did. The quiet wrangler who'd rather fix a fence than share a whiskey. The widower who'd buried his young wife under a crooked juniper tree last spring. Now here he was, hollow-eyed and hell-bent, marching past the saloon where he'd once thrown a punch that laid out the sheriff's cousin. Near the livery stable, a jackrabbit of a woman named Eleanor Ellie Hart scrubbed bloodstains off Doc Wallace's porch steps. The doc let her sleep in his storage room if she kept the place tidy and didn't mind the smell of ether. She was 30 if she was a day, her hands rough from hauling water, her back stiff from bending. Her own grief was older, a husband lost to a mine collapse, a stillborn baby wrapped in calico before the ground froze. She saw Jed hesitate by the bakery, his Adam's apple bobbing like a cork in a storm. The baker, fat old O'Leary, scowled through the window but didn't lift a finger. Then Ellie did something reckless. She tossed her scrub brush into the bucket with a splash loud enough to make Jed turn. Their eyes locked over a wagon rut, and for half a heartbeat the whole damn town held its breath. "Well," she called, voice sharp as a skinning knife. "You gonna stand there till those babies turn to jerky?" Jed's mouth worked soundlessly before he croaked. "I'll break horses for you, chop wood, dig graves, just—" His voice cracked like drought-hardened earth. "Just let 'em live." A drunk laughed from the saloon steps. Ellie ignored him, sizing up Jed's sunburnt face the way his knees threatened to buckle. "Hell," she muttered, yanking her apron off. "Should have led with the grave-digging part." She stomped across the street, snatched one baby right out of his arms, and jerked her chin toward the doc's place. "Move your feet, cowboy. That one's turning blue." As they passed the undertakers, Jed rasped, "Why?" Ellie didn't slow down. "Because today's my day to spite God," she said, kicking open the clinic door. And just like that, 2 broken souls and a pair of squalling infants became somebody else's problem. Or maybe, if the stars were feeling generous, somebody else's family. Jedediah couldn't meet Ellie's gaze as she reached for the nearest baby, his throat tight as a noose. But then her calloused fingers brushed the child's face, wiping away the crusted milk with the frayed edge of her shawl, a gesture so simple it near broke him. "All right," she said, just like that, like she'd been waiting at a crossroads for someone to point her toward purpose. The word hit him square in the ribs, warmer than whiskey. He didn't thank her. Men like him didn't know how. Just dipped his chin once the way a man does when he's too tired to hide his relief. The wind kicked up, tangling Ellie's sun-bleached hair across her face as she jerked her head toward the edge of town. Jed followed, boots crunching over dried manure and prairie grass, past the blacksmith's where the air smelled of scorched iron. The twins hiccuped against his chest, their bellies round for the first time in days, from the goat's milk Ellie had bullied out of old man Pritchard's nanny. Her place wasn't much a tar paper shack wedged between a rusted plow and a graveyard of whiskey barrels. The door groaned like a dying man when she shoved it open. Inside, a cot with a moth-eaten blanket, a crate stacked with dented tins, and a single oil lamp casting shadows that danced like devils. Jed laid the babies down, careful, as if handling dynamite. When the smaller one fussed, Ellie snatched it up before he could blink, cradling it against her shoulder with a rough hum that might have been a lullaby or a cattle-driving chant. They split a can of beans that night, passing the knife back and forth to scrape the last bits from the tin. The twins slept between them, their breath sweet with stolen honey. Ellie had slipped into their milk. Outside, a harmonica wailed from the saloon, and somewhere a drunk shouted about a rigged poker game. "You're staring, Clay," Ellie muttered, poking the fire with a stick. Jed's voice came out gravel rough. "Ain't seen a woman do what you did today," she barked a laugh. "What use common sense?" But her hand stilled on the blanket's edge, fingers tracing a patched-over tear. The truth sat between them like a third living thing. She could have turned him away. Should have by every law of the frontier. Near midnight, a gunshot cracked the dark, close enough to make the babies stir. Jed's hand went to his hip where his Colt should have been, but Ellie just sighed. "That'll be the Dawson boys again." She didn't flinch when another shot rang out. "They shoot at the moon every payday, claim it's cheating at cards." Jed watched her face in the flickering light. "You ain't scared of idiots with bullets." She smirked, but her eyes were dead serious. "Only thing that scares me is waking up one day and finding out I stopped caring." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people realize they've both been drowning and maybe they can take turns holding each other up. Somewhere past town, a coyote yipped and the smaller twin sighed in its sleep. Jed leaned back against the wall, letting his eyes close for the first time in 3 days. He didn't pray. Didn't need to. For now, the wind on the tin roof was him enough. Dawn came slow and honey-thick, painting the shack in gold light that made the dust motes glow like floating coins. The twins slept curled together like pups, their bellies round, for once their breath steady. Jed stood at the door frame, watching the town wake the baker's boy stumbling with his tray of rolls, the stable hands leading out the Morgans for the morning stage. His fingers flexed at his sides, restless. He could still feel the weight of Ellie's gaze from last night when she'd said that thing about caring. Like she'd peeled back his skin and seen the raw truth beneath. Ellie emerged behind him, her hair tied up with a strip of leather, the hollows under her eyes a shade lighter today. She didn't speak, just handed him a chipped cup of bitter chicory coffee, the last of her stash. Their fingers brushed, and for a heartbeat, neither pulled away. They worked in silence all morning. Jed patched the roof with a scrap of harness leather while Ellie rigged a sling from her shawl to carry the twins on her back. At one point she tossed him a rusty hammer without looking, and he caught it mid-air. A quiet understanding passed between them, the kind that forms between people who've spent too long surviving alone. When Jed ventured into town for supplies, he avoided the mercantile where folks would stare. Instead, he slipped into the back of the feed store, trading 2 days' worth of labor for a sack of cornmeal and a jar of rendered fat. On his way out, he spotted a wanted poster nailed to the post office door, his own face staring back, rough sketch and smudged. The sheriff had listed him for questioning about a missing cattle drive. His gut tightened, but he forced himself to walk slow, tipping his hat to Widow Jenkins as she passed. Back at the shack, Ellie took one look at the jar of fat and raised an eyebrow. "You steal this." "Earned it," he grunted, nodding toward the fresh blisters on his palms. She smirked, stirring the fat into a pot of grits. "Guess that makes you an honest man now." The first visitor came at high noon, Mrs. Calloway, the preacher's wife, her bonnet starched stiff as her smile. She lingered in the doorway, eyes darting from the twins to Jed's bare feet to Ellie's unbuttoned collar. "We're taking up a collection for the church roof," she said, holding out a tin like a weapon. "Even sinners can contribute." Ellie's spoon clattered against the pot. Before she could speak, Jed dropped his last silver dollar into the tin. The coin rang out sharp and final. Mrs. Calloway's smile faltered. "Tell your congregation," Jed said, voice low, "that money's from the twins. Ain't no sin in feeding children." The woman left in a rustle of petticoats. Ellie stared at him. "That was your last dollar." Jed shrugged, lifting a fussing twin to his shoulder. "Money comes back. Pride don't." That night, as the fire died to embers, Ellie reached across the twins' sleeping forms and gripped Jed's wrist. Her palm was rough, her grip sure. "They'll come for you," she said, no pity in it. "The law, or whoever's after you." He met her gaze, the firelight catching the flecks of gold in her eyes. "I know." "Then we best be ready." She didn't let go, and in that moment Jed realized this wasn't just shelter anymore. This was a stand. The kind a man makes when he's finally got something worth losing. Outside, the coyotes began their nightly chorus, singing to a moon that didn't care who lived or died. But inside, for the first time in years, Jedediah Clay wasn't alone. The basket from Mrs. Langley sat between them like an unspoken challenge, its contents smelling faintly of lavender and mothballs. Ellie held up one of the baby bonnets starched stiff as the woman who donated it and let out a sharp laugh. Hell, these'd scratch raw as burlap. But her fingers lingered on the stitching tracing where careful hands had once embroidered daisies along the hem. Jed said nothing, just took the jar of plum preserves and worked at the rusted lid until it gave with a pop. The scent hit them both, summer sweetness trapped in glass, a memory of orchards and better days. He dipped 2 fingers in, offered it to Ellie first. Their hands touched sticky and warm. The pastor's visit left a different kind of mark. When the old man walked away, his Bible left deliberately in the dirt, Jed finally spoke. "That book's worth more'n both of us combined." Ellie scooped it up, wiping dust from the cover with her sleeve. "Then I guess we're rich." She cracked it open to a random page, Song of Solomon, and snorted. "Listen to this, love is strong as death." She snapped it shut. Ain't that just like a preacher? Pretty words for ugly truths. That night, the water in the basin turned pink as Ellie scrubbed Jed's feet. He tensed when her fingers found the gash along his heel, a souvenir from his barefoot trek across the Badlands. "You're wasting soap," he muttered. Ellie dunked the rag again. "Hush. Only thing worse than a stubborn man is a stubborn man with infected feet." She didn't mention the wanted posters. Didn't have to. The way his shoulders stiffened at every hoofbeat outside said enough. A week later, the twins, now answering to makeshift names, Jack and June, were plump as prairie hens. Ellie had traded her last good needle for a tin of powdered milk, and Jed had taught Jack to grip his thumb with a fist stronger than seemed possible for something so small. Then the riders came. 3 of them dust-caked and smelling of cheap whiskey, reining up outside the shack at dusk. The leader, a raw-boned man with a silver star pinned crooked on his vest, spat tobacco near Jed's boots. "Heard there was a fella out here good with horses." His eyes flicked to Ellie, to the twins in her arms. "Also heard there's a $50 bounty on Jedediah Clay's head." Ellie shifted June to her hip, her free hand drifting toward the gutting knife on the crate. "You heard wrong." The sheriff, if that's what he was, smiled, showing teeth like gravestones. "That's so?" He nodded to his men. "Search the place." Jed stepped forward, blocking the door. "Ain't necessary." His voice was calm, the way deep water is calm before a storm. "I'll go quiet. Just let me—" Ellie cut him off with a laugh so sharp it made the horses sidestep. "Oh, you'll go quiet, all right." She jerked her chin toward the sheriff's belt. "That your warrant, or you just taking orders from the wind today?" The sheriff flushed. One of his men reached for his revolver, then froze as metal clicked behind them. Pastor Jacob stood 10 paces back, his ancient shotgun leveled at the lawman's spine. "Evening, gentlemen." His voice carried the weight of a man who'd buried too many fools. "I believe you're trespassing on church property." A beat of silence. Then the sheriff wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over." Ellie waited until their dust settled before lowering her knife. The pastor didn't. Just kept watching the road, his shotgun steady. "You 2 best sleep in the church tonight," he said finally. "Got a cellar with a lock." Jed touched Ellie's elbow the first time he'd reached for her without necessity. She turned, and in the fading light he saw it, not gratitude, not fear, but the fierce, terrifying joy of someone who'd finally found something worth fighting for. "All right," she said, just like that first night. And just like then, the word landed between them, warm and solid, as a shared heartbeat. The cradle Jed had built sat between them like a promise, its rough pine sanded smooth where Ellie's hands had rubbed it raw with lye soap. The twins, Jack and June, slept deep, their bellies full of goat's milk and corn mush. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain that wouldn't come. Then the letter arrived. The boy on the paint horse didn't dismount, just tossed the envelope like it was a dirty rag. Ellie caught it one-handed, her fingers leaving smudges on the sweat-damp paper. She read it slow, her face hardening into something Jed hadn't seen since that first day, the look of a woman bracing for a blow. "Ethan's brother," she said, finally folding the paper with deliberate creases. "Coming tomorrow. Says he's got an arrangement for me." Jed's knife stilled on the whetstone. "What kind?" The kind where he gets a housekeeper and I get a roof." Her laugh was bitter as willow bark. "Thinks I'll jump at it 'cause he's wearing a silk cravat and smelling of bay rum." That night, Jed sat watch at the window, his colt balanced on his knee. Ellie didn't tell him to sleep, just hummed to the twins, her voice rough as a rusted hinge until the stars faded. Whit Langford arrived at high noon, his black gelding glossy with brushed oil, his boots polished mirror bright. He dismounted with a flourish, flicking dust from sleeves cut too fine for Deadwood Creek. "Rosalind," he said like the name was a jewel he'd polished. "You look—" His eyes raked over her faded calico, the calluses on her hands. Tired, Ellie didn't step forward, didn't step back, just stood square in the doorway, blocking his view of the twins. "You lost Whit Santa Fe's that way." She pointed southwest with a finger still sticky from plum preserves. Whit's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now is that any way to greet family?" He produced a folded document from his coat, thick paper official seals. "I've come to settle Ethan's affairs, his share of the mine, Ethan's dead 3 years." Ellie cut in. "His affairs are dust and a debt to the mercantile." Behind her, June let out a thin wail. Whit's gaze sharpened. "Ah, so these are the foundlings everyone's whispering about." He stepped closer, voice dropping to a honeyed murmur. "Come home with me, Rosalind. A woman like you shouldn't be squatting in a shack playing mother to some drifters." Jed moved then. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable like gravity. He came to stand beside Ellie, his shoulder brushing hers. Said nothing. Didn't need to. Whit's lip curled. "Ah, the infamous Mr. Clay." He made a show of adjusting his gloves. "I'd heard you were indisposed. Something about missing cattle." The twins' crying sharpened. Ellie didn't turn. "You want to make your offer, make it. Otherwise, ride on." Whit sighed as if disappointed by poor manners. "Very well." He reached into his coat again, slowly watching Jed's hands, and produced a small velvet box. "Ethan would have wanted you cared for." He flipped it open. A gold band glinted inside, too new, too bright. "Marry me. The twins can stay with your sister in—" Ellie snatched the box and hurled it into the scrub. "Get off my land." For the first time, Whit's polish cracked. "This isn't your land, it's a church property," came a voice from the cottonwoods. Pastor Jacob emerged, his shotgun cradled casual as a hymn book. "Afternoon, Mr. Langford. Funny thing, I just got word from Santa Fe. Seems there's questions about those mine shares you mentioned." Whit's face drained of color. The twins' cries rose to a fever pitch. And Ellie did something unexpected. She reached back without looking, and Jed caught her hand, mid-air, their fingers tangling like roots in hard earth. Whit mounted stiffly. "This isn't over." Jed finally spoke, his voice rough as a rusted hinge. "It is for you." As the gelding's hoofbeats faded, Ellie didn't let go. Neither did Jed. The twins quieted as if sensing the storm had passed. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rumbled, the first real rain in months. Ellie tilted her face to the gathering clouds. "Reckon we'll need to fix that roof after all." Jed squeezed her hand. "Reckon so." And just like that, the unspoken thing between them took root, green and tender as spring wheat pushing through fallow ground. The flour sack hung heavy on Ellie's hip as she stepped out of the mercantile, the screen door slapping shut behind her like a punctuation mark. Behind her, the whispers clung like burrs, ungrateful, unnatural, living in sin with that wanted man. She adjusted her grip on the twins' sling, June's tiny fist brushing her jawline. Then she saw the rope. A crude noose dangled from the cottonwood branch, swaying lazy as a porch swing in the afternoon heat. Freshly tied. Meant to be seen. Jed materialized beside her like a shadow given form, his hand resting on the worn grip of his Colt. "Looks like someone's feeling theatrical," he murmured, eyes scanning the empty street. Ellie reached up and yanked the rope down in one sharp motion. The rough fibers burned her palms. "Idiots," she spat, coiling it with quick, practiced loops. "Good hemp, too. Waste of decent rope." A chuckle rasped from the alleyway. Pastor Jacob leaning against the church wall with his shotgun cradled in the crook of his arm. "That's my Ellie. turns lynching threats into clothesline. He nodded toward the mercantile window where faces ducked away from view. They'll learn. That night, Ellie built up the fire brighter than usual, the flames licking at the noose she'd repurposed as a spit for jackrabbit meat. Jed whittled a second cradle rocker, his knife flashing in the firelight. The twins slept bundled in Wit's abandoned silk cravat, now serving as swaddling. "You know they'll keep coming," Jed said at last, shaving a curl of wood into the flames. "Him, the law, others." Ellie turned the spit fat sizzling into the coals. "Let them." She jerked her chin toward the pastor's Bible on the crate left open to Psalms. "Even got scripture on our side now. Though an army encamp against me," Jed finished the verse, his voice gravel rough. "My heart shall not fear." He tested the rocker's curve with his thumb. "Never figured you for the churchy type." Ellie smirked. "Never figured you could read." A beat. Then they both laughed, quiet, startled sounds that made June stir in her sleep. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward like tiny rebellions. Come morning, the town found 3 surprises. 1. The mercantile's porch scrubbed spotless with lye soap. A fresh quarter of venison hanging on Widow Jenkins' hook. 3. And nailed to the cottonwood a wanted poster for Jedediah Clay, now sporting a charcoal mustache and the handwritten label, "Gone Respectable." Mrs. Langley clutched her pearls. The blacksmith grinned into his coffee. And high on the ridge, a rider in a too-fine coat wheeled his horse toward Santa Fe, suddenly less certain about unfinished business. Back at the shack, Ellie dipped a rag in honey water, dabbing at Jack's gums while Jed mended the roof. Their life wasn't pretty, wasn't proper, but it was theirs, forged in dust and defiance, sturdier than any silk-bound promise. The twins gurgled, fat fists waving at sunlight. Somewhere, a meadowlark sang, and the wind carried the scent of rain that might actually come this time. The storm hit like a drunk, kicking in a saloon door, thunder shaking the tar paper roof, rain sluicing through the patched leather seams. Jed lunged for the twins as the first drops hit the cradle, scooping them up just as the wind ripped the door clean off its hinges. Ellie didn't flinch. Just grabbed the washtub and shoved it under the worst leak, her movements sharp as gunshots. "Well," she shouted over the din, "guess we're sleeping in the church tonight after all." Lightning flashed, illuminating Jed's face as he clutched the babies, Jack wide-eyed and silent, June wailing like a banshee. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other across the chaos water streaming down their faces, the twins between them. Then Ellie burst out laughing, wild and unhinged, and Jed felt something crack open in his chest. They ran through the downpour, Ellie leading with the oil lamp, Jed cradling the twins beneath his shirt. Halfway to the church, her foot caught in a mud hole. Jed caught her elbow without thinking, his grip firm as oak roots. Their faces close enough to share breath, rain dripping off their noses, the lamp swinging crazily between them. Pastor Jacob had the cellar door open before they reached it. "Took you long enough," he grumbled, ushering them into the dry gloom. The scent of damp earth and stored apples wrapped around them as Jed set the twins on a stack of grain sacks. Ellie wrung out her hair, watching Jed peel his soaked shirt away from June's tiny fists. "You're dripping on the scripture," she deadpanned, nodding to the crate of Bibles in the corner. Jed shook his head like a wet dog, spraying water everywhere. "Ain't the first time sin's touched the good book." The pastor snorted, tossing them moth-eaten blankets. "You two are worse than my Easter congregation." The storm raged outside, but in that cellar with the twins finally asleep between them, Ellie reached across the darkness. Her fingers found Jed's wrist, tracing the scar there from some long-ago fight. He turned his hand over palm up, and she laced her fingers through his. No words, no explanations, just the steady pressure of two people deciding to anchor themselves to something real. Come dawn, they emerged to a world washed clean. The shack's roof had collapsed entirely, but the carved cedar hearts Jed had made still sat untouched on the one dry patch of floor gleaming in the newborn sunlight. Ellie picked one up, running her thumb over the grooves. "Reckon we could rebuild," she said softly. "Bigger, with a proper porch." Jed adjusted Jack in his arms, the baby's tiny hand gripping his pinky like a lifeline. "Could plant those apple saplings Pastor's been hoarding out back." Ellie smiled, then not the sharp survival grin Jed knew, but something softer, something that made his breath catch. Might need to add another room, she mused. Seeing as how we're apparently raising the next generation of Hellions, the twins cooed as if in agreement. Somewhere beyond the creek, a meadowlark sang, and for the first time in years, maybe in their whole damn lives, neither of them looked over their shoulder at what might be coming. The storm had passed. The earth was soft, and the work ahead, well, that was the good kind of hard. The bone ring gleamed dully in the lamplight, its silver wire catching firelight like a whispered promise. Ellie stared at it, at Jed's battered knuckles holding it steady despite the blood still seeping from his sleeve. The twins gurgled in his other arm, blissfully unaware of the storm still rattling the shutters. "You carved this," she said, not a question. Jed's throat worked. "From that elk last winter. The one that kept us fed through February." His voice roughened. "Silver's from the watch chain you pawned for June's medicine." Outside, the rain slowed to a hush. Somewhere a branch cracked under its own weight. Ellie reached out not for the ring, but to press her palm against Jed's bleeding forearm. His skin was cold and wet, but the pulse beneath leapt like a spooked Mustang. "Took you long enough," she murmured, her thumb brushing the crude bandage he'd tied from his own shirt. "I was starting to think you'd make me ask." Jed huffed something that might have been a laugh if it didn't sound so wrecked. The twins chose that moment to squall in unison, their tiny fists batting at his stubbled jaw. Ellie plucked June from his arms, tucking the fussing baby against her shoulder. "You're bleeding on the children, Clay." "Sorry, Shut up and put that ring on me before I change my mind." The bone was warm from his pocket, the fit perfect as he slid it onto her work-roughened finger. Ellie examined it critically. "It's ugly as sin," Jed's mouth quirked. "Matches my face." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the shed's new cracks, the puddle forming by the door, the way Jed's eyes held hers like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. Somewhere beneath the thunder, beneath the baby's cries and the creak of the rocking cradle, Ellie felt something slot into place, not the fairy tale click of a storybook ending, but the solid thunk of a barn door locking against the storm. She grabbed Jed's collar, pulling him down until their foreheads touched. "Next time," she said against his lips. "Don't wait for a damn hurricane to propose." The twins wailed louder, offended by the lack of attention. Jed kissed her anyway, quick and hard, and tasting of rain and reckoning before bending to scoop up Jack with his good arm. Outside, the clouds broke. Moonlight spilled through the ruined roof, painting their little family in silver. The ring on Ellie's finger caught the light, its bone and wire gleaming like something that had been waiting all along to be found. The wildflower rings left pollen stains on their fingers as they walked back through the dew-soaked grass, the twins babbling in Jed's arms. Ellie kept glancing at the bone ring on her finger, the way it caught the morning light, ugly and perfect, and theirs. Halfway home, Jed stopped dead. "Forgot something." He handed Ellie both babies and jogged back toward the church. She watched bemused as he disappeared into the bell tower. A moment later, the single rusted church bell clanged once loud enough to scatter crows from the cottonwoods. The sound rolled across the valley like God himself announcing breakfast. Ellie snorted. "That your idea of wedding bells, Clay?" Jed wiped his hands on his pants as he returned. "Figured the whole county ought to know." His grin was rare and bright as a silver dollar. "Specially wit." Back at the rebuilt cabin now, with a proper porch and that second room they'd talked about, Ellie found the mercantile's best linen tablecloth nailed to the wall like a banner. Beneath it sat a wobbling cake, iced with honey and crushed pecans, courtesy of Widow Jenkins. A note pinned to the plate read, "Even sinners deserve sweets. Don't tell the ladies' auxiliary." Jed stared at the cake like it might bite him. "When did she—" "While you were fetching the preacher's nightshirt," Ellie said, bouncing June on her hip. "She also left this." She nodded toward the hearth where a cast-iron skillet gleamed new and seasoned with a ribbon tied around the handle. They ate standing up, passing the twins between them, licking honey from their fingers. Between bites, Jed kept reaching for Ellie's hand, his thumb tracing the bone ring like he needed proof it was real. That afternoon, the town's women came, not the judgmental biddies, but the quiet ones. The laundress with scarred knuckles brought a quilt. The blacksmith's daughter left a jug of cider. Even Mrs. Langley appeared, depositing a tin of store-bought biscuits without a word, before hurrying away. As dusk fell, Ellie sat on the new porch step watching Jed teach Jack how to grip his finger, the bone ring pressed warm against her skin. Somewhere beyond the creek, a coyote yipped, and for the first time in her life, Ellie didn't tense at the sound. She just leaned into Jed's shoulder, their backs against the door frame they'd built together, and listened to the night settle around them, not empty anymore, but full. Full of cries and giggles and the creak of a rocking cradle. Full of home. The fire popped, sending embers swirling up toward the stars like tiny fireflies. Ellie stretched her legs toward the flames, the bone ring glinting on her finger as she reached for Jed's hand. His calloused thumb traced circles on her palm, a silent language they'd perfected over months of shared silence. Jack stirred in his cradle by the door, his tiny fist punching at the air. Without a word, Jed rose and lifted the fussing baby, cradling him against his chest, with the ease of a man born to fatherhood. Ellie watched as he swayed gently, humming that same tuneless melody he'd used since the twins first came to them, part lullaby, part cattle-driving chant, Holy Jed. "Remember when you could barely hold one without looking like you were defusing dynamite?" Ellie murmured, nodding toward June, still asleep in her lap. Jed's mouth quirked. "Remember when you threatened to gut me if I woke them?" The wind carried the scent of sage and wood smoke mingling with the sweet smell of sleeping babies. Somewhere beyond the creek, a lone coyote yipped its cry, answered by another farther west. Ellie tilted her head back, drinking in the sprawl of stars, more stars than she'd ever seen growing up back east, more stars than seemed possible. Jed settled beside her again, Jack now drowsy against his shoulder. "Pastor says the railroad's coming through next spring," he said quietly. "Says they'll need hands to build the station." Ellie stilled. Railroads meant people. People meant trouble for a man with a past like Jed's. But it also meant work. Steady wages. A future. She turned the bone ring on her finger once before meeting his gaze. "We could use a proper stove." Jed exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing. "And glass windows." "School books," Ellie added, nodding toward the twins. "Apple trees," Jed countered. The fire burned lower, the embers glowing like Jed's eyes in the dark. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew a sound that would have sent Jed riding for the horizon 6 months ago. Tonight, he just pressed a kiss to Jack's downy head and reached for Ellie's hand again. The twins sighed in unison, their breaths sinking like they'd done since birth. The coyotes fell silent, and in that moment, with the prairie stretching endless around them and the stars bearing witness, Ellie knew this was the quietest kind of victory. Not the sort they wrote ballads about, but the kind that lasted. The kind built from bone rings and mended roofs and whispered vows. The kind that grew,